Hello, everybody. Welcome to Modern Slavery, Changing the Conversation. This is a webinar brought to you by Always Possible, working for the University of Sussex. I'm Tony Dillon, and I'll be facilitating today. Over the last year, most of the world has become familiar with a restriction of some of their freedoms because of the pandemic. But today we are looking at modern slavery, the fact that now in the UK, there are people whose freedoms have been curtailed in the most extreme and brutal ways by the form of criminal exploitation that is modern slavery. Our panelists today are all specialists in various areas of modern slavery, and they'll be bringing their perspectives to the subject. This is a Zoom webinar, so I'll deal with some housekeeping first. The audience can see us, the participants, but we can't see you. However, we very much want you to participate in this event via the web chat. That is the little chat box on the bottom of your screen if you're not familiar with Zoom. My colleague Annie-Marie will be monitoring the web chat. You won't be able to interrupt the actual presentations, but please feel free to put forward your questions. And then what we want to do is, because there's a logical progression to the presentations today, we'll actually take the questions from the chat at the end and hope to get a discussion going. In order to sort of get a bit more perspective on where we're all coming from, we've been very fortunate today in that, in fact, this webinar has sold out. We have decided to do a little poll of where you're coming from first. So my colleague is now going to share the poll on the screen, and there'll be instructions on how to vote so that we get an idea of what your interest is. Right. And then by the magic of statistics, we can now see what the responses are. So thank you very much for contributing. For the first question, what would you most like to understand from today's event? We have 69% saying a better understanding of what modern slavery is or looks like in Sussex. And then 65% with specifically a better understanding of what I can do to recognise and help identify modern slavery. So the second question on the participants and where we're all from. So we have 39% as professionals working in a related field. We're very grateful to have you here and really want to hear your organisation and professional experience of this issue. So please do share in the chat. And we have 18% for personal development and knowledge, always a good thing. 41% on both and 2% on other. So you're all very welcome, and we're very interested in all of your perspectives. So that's great. We've got a bit of context for the speakers. Thank you. So the running order for today, we've got an hour and a half. So we're aiming to finish at 1:30. So I'm the facilitator, Tony Dillon from Always Possible. Speakers today are Dr. Shahrzad Fouladvand, lecturer in international criminal law for the University of Sussex. Richard Lancashire, force manager for modern slavery, Sussex Police. Anna Wilson from Restore at King's Church, Hastings, and Helena Croft, who's the director at Streetlight UK. So a fantastic panel for you, really interested in hearing the presentations. There'll be roughly 10 minutes each. And so if we're okay to start, first up is Shahrzad.
So in the slot that I have got, I'm going through some of the points that I thought it may be relevant and important in terms of the scale of the problem in different sectors. And mainly after giving you some ideas about the statistics and some of the relevant kind of facts and figures, very briefly, I will touch upon the healthcare and modern slavery and the importance of awareness within the housing sector and modern slavery as well. So although I'm in the law department, I'm not going to give you a legal kind of lecture, but mostly just highlighting some of the points. You may know, some of you you're familiar maybe with some of the statistics globally, and mainly from the International Labour Organization, that they estimated around 40.3 million people were victims of slavery. The way they categorize the victims of slavery, they look at it from the forced labor, which includes private economy and forced sexual exploitation, forced labor imposed by state authorities. And then they separate the forced marriage as well. So 25 million out of that figure are there is kind of exploitation within labor or sexual exploitation, and forced marriage mainly happens, or there are some evidence about the victims of that particular kind of form in Africa, in the Middle East, and so on. Mostly women and children been involved or be seen as victims of forced marriage. The kind of alarming fact is about the status of children. 1 in 4 victims of modern slavery were children, and we can see that gradually in different countries that we're dealing with kind of increase of the number of children who've been victimized by the traffickers for different forms and different purposes. Now, if you wanted to focus in the context of the United Kingdom, and especially then I will touch upon some of the issues in relation to or legal aspects of England and Wales. So we have the national referral mechanism, and if you look at the latest available report at the end of 2020, there have been 10,600 referrals of potential victims of modern slavery. As some of you may know, we have the single competent authority, which is kind of responsible for making decisions on the referrals that they receive. And they had 10,608 reasonable ground decision, and 3,454 were conclusive ground decisions by the end of the quarter in 2020. You may be interested to know that the first quarter of this year's statistics will come out tomorrow. That's the plan, the timeline for the latest one, which may be available tomorrow or from tomorrow. So when you look at those statistics, you will see that the referrals mainly in relation to adult potential victims were more than 5,000, compared with the 5,800 ish in 2019. So what has changed really? We can see the increase of the referrals for child potential victims, which we can see the trend or the figures are going up slightly. Perhaps you can see the differences year by year, especially from 2014 onto 2020, the kind of the number of NRM referrals that we can see in this graph. And there can be different kind of arguments, debates, how the figures were kind of quite high in some years and maybe not so much in the last couple of years. So we are still developing the kind of understanding of how NRM works and how the authorities can make that referral. So there are quite a lot of different kind of factors can contribute to the level of the numbers, as well as the available statistics that we should take into consideration, which I suppose perhaps Rich can touch upon that if that's something that he may cover later on. I also found this figure, this graph quite interesting and very important, because as you see from 2014 to 2020, the kind of the trend of the and the kind of the legal definition 18 or over and children under 18 years old, you can see the trend is dropping for adult victims. Children is going up. And another interesting thing is about the county line cases. Again, this is one of the kind of referrals where, as you can see here, and this is slide I put from the NRM kind of report, Home Office report, that were classified as a subtype of labour exploitation. And that was kind of officially were made in a way in the reports in Q4 of the 2019. So mainly we can see the criminal exploitation and criminal activity of the children for especially in relation to drug issues. There are different colors, as you may see, so there are different columns, but what is constant is the increase of the child or children victims, especially male, for the purpose of that labor exploitation, as I said. Although, yes, of course, the majority of sexual exploitation victims are also girls and women, but I think what's important on this special kind of referral, you can see the kind of increase of the numbers of NRM referrals flagged as counterlines by the age group. I'm sure there's a few, majority of you have attended today kind of our webinar. You may agree with the fact that vulnerabilities play a very important role, and traffickers targeting mostly the vulnerable individuals. That can happen in a variety of the sectors and places for different purposes, which we call it as exploitation. Would it be from among homeless people, or immigration status, or family conflict or conflict zones, natural disasters, social isolation, sexual orientation, or gender identity, hunger, addiction, and so many other places. So all of these elements and factors can cause vulnerabilities, and that's where then the traffickers can target those individuals. Hence, I get to the different forms, and these different forms of exploitation is kind of developing. The top three that I bolded, these are based on the, if you like, the order based on the statistics. So especially in the UK, so mostly we are dealing with the criminal activities of the, as I said, the cases that we are increasing dealing with. So that's more of the labor exploitation as well as the sexual exploitation. So those are three top kind of forms, if you like, that we get more kind of potential cases. And of course, there are removal of organs, use of begging, forced marriage, illicit adoption. And in some countries, also we're dealing with, or there are some children who've been used and exploited for a kind of armed conflict in armed conflict areas like DRC, Congo in Africa. What is really important in terms of recognition and also in terms of identification of potential victims of human trafficking or modern slavery is really to be aware of the indicators. The International Labour Organization, they have published their indicators a few years back, and those indicators for labor exploitation and sexual exploitation for adults and for children. So those are kind of very important indicators which have been kind of informing the national kind of indicators of different countries across the world as well. So these are just a few examples that I put here. And you may say that the kind of adults for labor and sexual exploitation indicators quite similar to the children one, which they may be similar, but it's so important to be aware of the way they can be recruited, they can be abused, they can be deceived, coerced, and so on, which some of those elements, of course, for children would not be applied because we are talking about children under 18. So however, it's very important to be aware of those indicators that we can see. Violence, for example, is very important. Job opportunities, changing lifestyle, family reunification, housing, living condition, documentation is very important. Whether or not they especially those who are traveling from some outside the EU zone, or they are not national of the EU countries. Education, language is a very huge, important barrier. And again, some of these elements over here that can be seen as the vulnerability that I was talking about earlier. And so therefore the traffickers, they can target those individuals, but we can see the indicators can cover some of those. And the couple of things here, again, I would like to highlight the cultural and religious beliefs. It's quite important, and also forced lie to authorities' families. This is one of the issues that perhaps makes the whole counterline cases quite complicated in some cases, especially when it comes to the Section 45 of the Modern Slavery Act 2015 for defence. In terms of healthcare, I thought it's quite important, and there are some issues in there. And the reality from the academic world is that there are very limited published research on the characteristics of modern victim engagement with healthcare system. One of the studies done, I think it was 2016-17, they studied 98 female survivors of trafficking in England, and they found that 29% had one or more pregnancies during the trafficking process. And most of them sexually abused. They were struggling with or suffering from mental health disorder. They may have had some termination, and there are some also communities or from ethnic minority groups like Roma women, that exploitation of young, vulnerable, kind of pregnant Roma women for fraudulent benefits claim, for example, was one of the founding of that. And very interestingly, another survey of 33 of the 34 UK medical schools, there were only 9 9 of them they're providing teaching on modern slavery. So that shows a lot of gap in terms of the understanding, and therefore to be be aware of that. Here, I just wanted to highlight 2 different kind of or counter argument to that. So the first of all, just following what I was saying in the previous slide, victims are often not recognized. So when being treated, when they come to any surgery or clinic, and if they don't get recognition or that identification, so the risk the risk is that to get back to where they were in terms of in hands of the abuser or traffickers. So obviously, emergency departments, sexual health clinics, GP surgeries, and community, most kind of important areas that they need to have that know-how to report as well, because they have to do that or follow some sort of perhaps instruction or advice or guidelines to do the report, but at the same time do not put their patients into any danger. A kind of a contradictory kind of report, if you like, or counter argument is in relation to the lack of clarity and confusion about the eligibility criteria for the survivors of human trafficking to be able to get the kind of healthcare that they need. And that study was 2018. They looked at especially some Albanian female survivors of sex trafficking in the West Midlands. And many of them were survivors of sexual exploitation, and they were having difficulties in relation to getting any health care needs. So they had to go through many GPs over and over to be able to be seen by someone. You may be interested or some of you already may be aware of the Chief Nursing Officer Summit in 2018, where there was huge discussion about the modern slavery in the healthcare system, and especially. If you wish to carry on or follow up some of the issues, perhaps you can go back to those documents. And I know I should come up to end of mine. So the other side that I wanted to highlight, the importance of the knowing or having a kind of efficient identification of victims of human trafficking is in the housing sector or letting agents, according to the UK Association of Letting Agents. For example, the cleaning or companies or the employment of the agency staff are two big ones that they can face a high risk of having an individual potentially maybe a victim of human trafficking. So yes, of course, they have to provide a statement under the Modern Slavery Act because of the if they meet that criteria of the minimum turnover. So that again, there is a need for the construction sector to be aware of the strong kind of risks of exploitation of labor which exist in their supply chains. And in that regard, just a few kind of questions that I put, that you can take it as indicators, you can put that, take it as a signs, which are quite informing and important questions. For example, are occupants transported to and from the property jointly? Is there evidence of poor living conditions, subletting? That's very important. Paying the rent, the person who's paying it is different from the person who is occupying the property. Or if whether someone is paying the rent on behalf of the number of individuals in that property and not being named on the tenancy agreement, and also whether or not someone has paid or offered to pay the full cost of the tenancy upfront. So these are some of the questions that can be quite important to consider in order to be able to identify whether or not, or to minimize the risk, if you like, in that sector. And of course, my background, I should have just highlight the important legal kind of background or legal instruments of the modern slavery or trafficking, which is supplemented to the United Nations Transnational Organized Crime Convention, this protocol on human trafficking, which defines the human trafficking. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen this many, many times about the three important parts of that you are dealing with the acts, that what is it, and how is it done and why. So it's a question of what and how and why. So the why is the exploitation, and how is also very important. And in a kind of wider context, we have the international, again, level, the International Labour Organization, as I said, but also a lot of harmonization of the legal instrument being done in relation to the Council of Europe Convention on Action Against Trafficking in Human Beings, 2005, which we do have the national referral mechanism as part of the obligation to this particular convention. And of course, the Modern Slavery Act, which is the kind of the most important kind of piece of legislation in relation to backing up and supporting all those issues that I discussed earlier in my slides, to be able to put that into perspective and to be able to enforce it. And thanks very much.
Shahrzad, thank you very much, and lots of very useful information in there. We've been watching the chat as we've been saying, and we'll be picking up on some points later on, but I think I would just highlight that people are commenting on how shocking the statistics are. I particularly was very shocked to hear about the increase with children. It's been very useful to see factors causing vulnerability, to look at the indicators of trafficking. And also when Shahrzad was talking about experiences amongst healthcare workers and also those involved with supply chain and tenancies, I think we have all of those sectors represented in our audience today. So, we'll be delighted to take questions from you. So thanks to Shahrzad, and then following up from that, we're now going to move to our second speaker, Richard Lancashire.
Thanks very much indeed, Tony. Thanks for the invites to speak. I think I've got about 10 minutes, and bearing in mind this subject can take days, if not hours, to go into detail about. Forgive me, this is going to be a fairly sort of short input, and I've selected just a couple of areas to talk about. So just a tiny little bit about me. So I've been working for the police for about the last 35 years, and the last 12 being heavily involved in the intelligence, investigation and partnership working for modern slavery and its associated subjects. And that's been on a sort of local, regional, national and international level. So I was lucky enough to take up a role in early 2018 that was funded by the Sussex Police and Crime Commissioner then, who was making a significant investment into this subject. So grateful thanks for that opportunity. So bear in mind you've joined this particular webinar. I'm sort of working on the assumption that there is a bit of modern slavery knowledge already, and also you've had a bit of an input from Dr. Fouladvand in relation to sort of some of the key areas in legislation. So I'm just going to select a couple of areas. One is a couple of aspects of the law enforcement response. And secondly, some observations and discussion points in relation to the reporting by the community and partner agencies. So in relation to the law enforcement response, modern slavery, as we've got there, it is serious organised crime. There's no doubt about it, and I make no apology for saying that it's 100%, that modern slavery is 100% requires the approach to be made as such. There are some good examples of individual offending, or what appears to be individual offending for modern slavery, but by and large, modern slavery routinely involves criminal networks who operate using sophisticated techniques. And they do so to prevent detection, to maximise their profits. I think Shahrzad may have said, and if she hasn't, forgive me, that modern slavery is amongst the highest profitability of any crime type in the world. But also they use these techniques to reduce, if not to remove, the likelihood of their victims disclosing their predicament and implicating them. It's in the interests of them to carry out their business using industries that we may take for granted and in fact possibly have become desensitized to. There are examples of where it's taken months of detailed victim management to achieve the very first disclosures of the associated exploitation. And that has enabled for us to respond, to seek those responsible and seek prosecution. And that's a predicament to remember when we talk about early frontline determinations. It may quite easily be people believe that they've been given somebody ample opportunity to disclose everything that they may be a victim of, but we can't emphasize enough that sometimes the traumatic impact that may well prevent people from disclosing. Complex victim control measures are just one element that means modern slavery must be investigated by those with associated thematic knowledge and expertise, not only in the way it happens, but also in using all the available covert, overt, technical and financial capabilities of investigation. It's a serious matter. It's no surprise, therefore, that the UK Independent Anti-Slave Commissioner and National Policing Leads require all investigations to be so undertaken. So very quickly, in relation to Sussex and the demand, I know that Shahrzad mentioned a bit about the national referral mechanism earlier. So this is the means by which designated first responders can comply with their obligations under Section 52 of the Act by notifying the Home Office of potential victims. That's not proven victims, just potential victims, but also a means by which those designated first responders can work on material provided to them by other parties. For instance, you may be surprised to learn that the National Health Service are not designated first responders, even with the amount of people they see in vulnerable positions. So we, the designated first responders, have to work with them to make sure that they're so referred. So one of the key contributors to national referral mechanism submissions is the Home Office themselves. So in relation to UK Border Force, Immigration Enforcement and UK Visas and Immigration, of course, who run the asylum scheme and the visa schemes. So they make up a large proportion of those referred. To put into context for Sussex, if you add together all of the 43 police forces in the whole country, including Scotland and the Police Service of Northern Ireland, Sussex Police, in respect of the demand placed upon them by referrals through the NRM, are second. They're second after the Metropolitan Police. This is according to the figures that were published on Q4 of 2020. However, people will know that the Metropolitan Police have a huge amount of staff. If you then divide up that number by the amount of staff they have, Sussex Police are far and away the most put upon in relation to the investigative demand by their detectives from Home Office referrals into the NRM. So it is not only a serious matter for the country and for Europe and the world, but for Sussex it is unbelievably relevant. So another aspect to the modern slavery fight, the law enforcement fight, is the meaningful partnership working. And this is absolutely crucial and central to what we're trying to achieve today through Tony's organisation and through the University of Sussex. So Sussex have a number of geographic partnerships. They have an established one that initially was supported by funding in East Sussex. There is a very, very good partnership in Brighton and Hove, and also in 2 parts of West Sussex. And 1 or 2 of the people that are key stakeholders in those areas will be on the call today. Additionally, we have a county-wide network, an anti-slavery network, which brings together partners throughout the whole area. And this is a really, really well-supported network. And actually, we form part of a National Network Coordinators Forum, where we join the people who run those networks across the whole UK to make sure that we're doing we're learning from every bit of what others do. So one of the key achievements recently of that network is we managed to convince all of the senior local authority leads, Sussex Police Force leads, and also some good commentary from the Anti-Slavery Commissioner to sign a county-wide support for the UN Sustainable Development Goals 8.7 to try and make Sussex a slavery-free environment by 2030. That was signed up last October on Anti-Slavery Day on the 18th of October. And additionally, the business and sporting sectors are absolutely key. We've got really, really good support from some of the major sport business, the corporate areas in Sussex, both at SME and large international corporate sectors, and also the sporting sectors. So we've got a really good example of the sporting sector is in relation to the activities by Brighton Hove Albion Football Club, for instance. Everyone knows that there is a great draw towards the footballing industry from places around the world, and people will seek to take advantage of those that desperately want to get to the UK for that. And so there's a huge amount of awareness and vigilant business activity that's driven by the safeguarding leads at Brighton Hove Football across the whole of the English Football League. So on the slide you can see in front of you, you can just basically see a couple of buzzwords and phrases that just provides a little bit of an insight into the challenges we have. There's enormous barriers to disclosure. Those responsible for modern slavery are very adept at making it a serious issue for people to potentially reveal their predicament to the authorities. Hence the reason why, again, unbelievably good third sector organisations who provide a little bit of a function to be able for people to be able to speak to them rather than necessarily the law enforcement organisations. So very quickly then, the second slide, if I may, Annie-Marie, the second slide, this is just really to a quick discussion point for yourselves. When we're talking about ordinary scenarios that people might see anywhere. And of course, people look at these things according to their knowledge, their experience, their position, their role. So if you look at the top photo, the top right-hand photo, that could easily be an image of two partners or family members buying a ticket. It could be just completely unconnected members of the public that happen to be standing shoulder to shoulder on adjacent machines. Or it could be a person who is facilitating the travel of another for their subsequent serious criminal exploitation. It could easily be that the girl you can see on the left-hand side is being moved from one place in the country to another for purposes of serious offences. How much more information might somebody need for a member of the community or someone from a public authority or a third sector organisation to consider whether or not that is worthy of reporting? Is there anything to report there? And if so, how do they do it? Who do they report and what sort of information do they give? And are there any sort of barriers and challenges to those discussions? And I'll go into that in a moment. The second slide, the bottom of that slide, that bottom image, that could again be a whole number of different scenarios. It could be completely unconnected young people that have no criminal connection whatsoever, or it may well be that there is a organised crime network that are forcing those people to be available at a particular time with a particular job in hand, not just because they are being paid to do so as something of work, but it may well be something that they do because there are serious punitive consequences if they don't. What do we know about these people? How much research and what sort of interventions might we need to do in order to find out more information, and then how is it reported, if at all? So, what might affect the decision to report? And this isn't unique to modern slavery, it's the same for all crime. So I would say that people might say, do I know what I'm looking at? Do I know who to tell and how to tell them? What might be the consequences of me reporting it? Or what might be the consequences of me not reporting it? If I don't report it, might no one else have the ability or opportunity to do? And what does that mean for any particular victims? What if I've misinterpreted the situation? Would I appear foolish if by suggesting a certain thing may be the case when it's not? Is there a fear of involvement, being a witness to something? Do people have a sort of shudder and a cold run down their spine if they think that they're going to be brought into the sort of the criminal justice world as some sort of involved party? Or is there just simply an assumption that I'm sure if it was serious, somebody else will report it or somebody else already has done? So they're very, very legitimate questions, and ones that people ask of themselves every day. So obviously, working for the police force, selfishly, I would desperately love everybody to ring the police as the prime pathway for any situation. And one of the main issues for me is we have got the statutory 24/7 365 emergency response to any critical scenarios. We've got police powers that we can apply. We've got subject intervention and victim safeguarding to offer, preserving and securing evidence and forensics and all that sort of stuff. However, there are alternatives, and this is my sort of last point really, is we have a 24/7 Crime Stoppers line that is very, very now adept at modern slavery. In fact, their director is a former head of modern slavery for the Metropolitan Police. We have a 24/7 confidential referral line to the Salvation Army. We have a modern slavery helpline run by a charity in Bristol called Unseen. And then we've got the Gang Masters and Labour Abuse Authority line as well. So we've got a lot of people that can receive information. Again, inevitably for me, I'm going to plumb for the police angle because many of those will find that they can speak to people, they can give advice, but they may well have to then send that material to the police force in any case. But there are good and proper reasons why people should consider those other areas as well. So that's my sort of short input given. I Apologise that it's only touching on the very, very broad subject, but back over to you, Tony.
Oh, Richard, thank you so much for those insights. And once again, there's a lot to pick up on. And I've been watching the chat, and we've got people both raising issues and also helping with finding solutions. So this is getting very interesting. I'd mainly just like to thank you for your input over the law enforcement response, and we really appreciate the fact that these are very busy times, and people are commenting on how disproportionate the need is in Sussex. So I think we might pick up on that point later. A point to emphasise is that this is serious organised crime. There's a certain amount of awareness in the public eye at the moment because of two recent big TV series that have touched on this. I used to work in television, so I always mention this. So there's the BBC's Line of Duty, and there's also Channel 4's Hollyoaks, who recently ran a long-running story on children involved in the county lines thing. Now, everyone always says to me that you know, corners are cut in the process of making TV programmes, and often the timelines are sort of accelerated to make the drama more interesting. But I think the fact that those series have put the issue of large-scale organised crime on our screens has to be useful. I would, before I hand over to the next speaker, just pick up on the point that Richard made about how it is so important within the county that we make use of a partnership response to this issue. We are stronger when we work together. So that's why Always Possible is delighted to be working with the University of Sussex and with all of the panellists to look at ways that we can do more of the stuff that works and get beyond some of these barriers. So again, things that we'll pick up on later when we do questions at the end. So I think we'll now move to the third presentation, which is from Anna. So Anna, if you're ready, I'll just hand it.
I'm ready.
Welcome. Thank you.
I'm ready. I'm ready, and I'm going to be changing gear a bit now. Thank you very much, Shahrzad and Richard, for your excellent presentations. Really, really helpful. I head up Restore at King's, supporting survivors of human trafficking and modern slavery in Hastings and St Leonard's. We're a Christian project based at King's Church, Hastings. We aim to give hope to those we're supporting, mainly through befriending and running events that encourage and empower them. To date, we've been working just with women survivors who get rehoused in Hastings or St Leonard's by the Home Office after their initial time in safe house accommodation. That's away, so we're away from where they've been in trafficking and modern slavery situations and away from their safe house accommodation. Hastings and St Leonard's has been a Home Office dispersal area for refugees and asylum seekers for about 20 years now. And I just want to give you a bit of background about Restore and where it's come from. So anti-trafficking was put on the hearts of a group of people in King's Church back in 2008. We got together to pray regularly. We informed ourselves about the problem. We went to any training available, mainly at that time by the Salvation Army and Stop the Traffic, who were the pioneers at the time. And we did as much networking as we could to find out what, if anything, was being done around the county and country to help victims and survivors. Bear in mind, these were early days prior to human trafficking being recognised much as a tool, as a big issue, and well before the Modern Slavery Act. Although our desire was to support victims of human trafficking and modern slavery, at first we were taken in a slightly different direction, finding ourselves more involved in awareness raising on the whole issue. At King's Church, we hosted a number of training events between 2015 and 2017, drawing on the expertise of Stop the Traffic. And using one of the Stop the Traffic trainers, we hosted a number of awareness raising and Train the Trainer conferences. In all, about 400 people came to the awareness raising conferences during that time, and just under 100 went on to be trained as single points of contact in their workplaces through the Train the Trainer sessions. So the first awareness raising event in February 2015 was attended by a wide range of local agencies, police, charities and government organisations. We expected 20 people to turn up, but 90 came, so it was a bit crazy. From this, we were able to bring together the police and a number of organisations to launch Hastings Anti-Trafficking Hub. And later on, Stop the Traffic themselves were able to provide a worker in Hastings for 3 years. And some of you will have known Laurie Church, the local modern slavery community coordinator. She took on all the networking, awareness raising events, training for SPOCs and much, much more. And then in 2017, from the Hastings Anti-Trafficking Hub, the multi-agency Discovery was launched. So in the last 4 years, particularly whilst Laurie was in post and since the launch of Discovery, our own focus, Restore's own focus has changed from awareness raising to one of focusing on supporting survivors of human trafficking locally. That's really what we were hoping to do in the first place. We were specifically interested in supporting women after they had been rehoused here from their first safe houses, their first safe house accommodation in day 46 support, as it became known. Some of the trafficked people placed in Hastings by the Home Office are already in the national referral mechanism when they arrive, and some are not. The system is a bit hit and miss as to the kind of support they will have had before they come here from their safe houses. The government contract out the care of modern slavery, human trafficking victims to the Salvation Army. That's already been mentioned. And in this area, the Salvation Army then subcontract out to Migrant Help, who have a key worker serving us here in Hastings. At Restore, we've been able to complement the work of Migrant Help and the Links project. Links is a local drop-in centre for asylum seekers, refugees and new migrant communities. It's been said that our support has been particularly valuable, as you can imagine, through the last year with lockdowns, as we're here on the ground. We're here in Hastings, we're here in St Leonard's. The Links project drop-in centre has closed, in fact, until today. And Migrant Help based in Dover has only been able to provide phone or video support during the government due to the government guidelines, obviously. I thought it might be helpful to just to mention some of the issues that we have seen while getting alongside women locally. So Restore has been working mostly alongside survivors of sex trafficking. So we have a good idea now of some of the problems they encounter mentally, emotionally, and physically following their horrendous experiences. To help with this, in 2018 and 2019, we hosted 2 conferences at King's Church or Hastings Centre called Working with Survivors of Human Trafficking. The speaker and trainer was Chief Exec of the Snowdrop Project in Sheffield. Snowdrop is recognised by the government as best practice provider in the field of supporting victims and survivors of human trafficking, modern slavery. So we thought we were safe having them train us too. And I've got to say the training has really helped us to understand and support the local women better. In our befriending, we're mainly helping the women to navigate the NRM and asylum systems, which are fraught with problems, we're finding. At least half the women we have supported have fallen through one or both of the systems just because there's no joined up process between the NRM and the asylum pathways. It's catastrophic for them when they are successfully granted their traffic status through the NRM and then refused asylum. In refusing them asylum, the threat is then that they will be returned home, and that's home to their traffickers. So we do campaign and advocate as we help them navigate the broken systems and as the difficulties crop up. Last year, I had the opportunity to explain the problems in the system that we're regularly encountering to a Ministry of Justice webinar. And tomorrow we're meeting our local MP to talk about how the proposed immigration changes will adversely affect traffic victims unless it's changed. To be honest, if I can be, I'm often really exasperated with the Home Office because of the system, not only because of the system, but because of the way the hostile environment causes the women to be treated. It's just kind of like abuse upon abuse for them. The first time I accompanied one of the women to a hearing in London, I was with a young, particularly frightened young woman. And the Home Office barrister at this hearing just kept calling her a liar again and again. It was really aggressive, and it was a new experience for me. I was horrified, but apparently that kind of treatment is all just quite normal. We warn the women now about what they may encounter and make sure that we accompany them to their hearings whenever they want, and especially the first time. The events that we've run here pre-COVID for the women and their children have included pamper events, afternoon teas, Christmas parties, creative arts days, pizza and picnic events, walks and coffees out. During lockdown, obviously, these contact events have been replaced by taking them regular gift bags, pamper treats for the women and activities for the children, and then just having chats on the doorstep, all good for keeping in touch and ensuring they're coping as best they can. Giving them help as needed, new Hoover, pram, pushchair, school uniforms, opening a bank account, helping with Aspen card problems, all sorts. All the women we support have language difficulties to one degree or another, with English as their second language. And this has been particularly difficult through the pandemic when they have been expected to know the government guidelines. One of the women was picked up by the police, sitting on the beach with her children. It was the first lockdown and she didn't know she shouldn't have been doing that. She had no idea, no internet, no TV, no radio, little understanding of English, and no guidance in her own language. It is a big problem. So there's much to do to improve things for victims and survivors of modern slavery and human trafficking. With what we're doing at Restore, we just feel like we're barely scratching the surface. But we're committed to keep going, one precious life at a time. So thank you for listening.
Anna, and thank you. I'm just going to do a direct lift from the comments where somebody said, amazing work, Anna. You may think that you're just sort of touching the start of this, but people are very moved by what you've been speaking about. In particular, I'd like to sort of highlight that, you mentioned how you got into this as an organisation right almost before the beginning, how important training was. I think that's something that we can pick up on later. And also the importance of campaigning and of the advocacy work that you're doing. And we do know the tricks that some people can get up to in terms of trying to sort of silence people. And we've got some questions about how we can help with combating that. So thank you very much. And I'd like to stay in this area of organisations that support the victims of this form of crime, and we will now move over, please, to Helena Croft from Streetlight UK.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Anna. And that was really inspiring and very close to my heart, as you will hear, in terms of what we're doing as a frontline support service. And also to Shahrzad and Richard, brilliant to just hear those presentations that are all kind of flowing seamlessly together. So I'm Helena Croft. I'm the Director CEO of Streetlight UK, which I founded back in 2010, and that went operational in 2012, starting in the north of Sussex. We now cover Sussex, predominantly East Sussex and North Sussex, and also Surrey and London. And the issue that we're involved in predominantly is prostitution, but within that we engage with and identify victims of modern slavery on a regular basis. So I'm going to share my screen, and I thought I would start by focusing on some case studies. And just these are just some snapshots into the kind of women that we are meeting. And it is predominantly women, which I'll come to a bit later. There is a tiny proportion nationally of men within the sex industry. And I'm focusing on trafficking within the sex industry because that's our expertise, that's our field that we operate. So here's just a couple of stories about, oops, apologies. Phone call going at exactly the wrong moment. Can you still see my screen okay? Is that all right? Great. So Miss A was a student in Sussex University. She was engaging in prostitution to pay her university fees. She told us that she hated escorting, but she felt there was no alternative. And although these case studies relate to prostitution, they're also vulnerable to being trafficked because there's a lot of cross-flow within prostitution and in the sex industry generally where trafficking takes place. And obviously we were able to work with that individual, Miss A, and to get her access to a loan so that she could stop prostituting herself and continue with her. She was actually doing a master's at the University of Sussex, which I thought was quite relevant to share that case study today. Miss B, a Romanian lady in her early 20s. We do regular police operations, joint operations with Sussex Police, Surrey Police and the Met Police. And this is where the majority of the trafficked victims that we come across are. And you can see from this Romanian lady, her profile had been created for her. She didn't even know about it by her boyfriend, and the man was arrested for trafficking offences. So we do follow these cases right through to giving evidence in court and resulting in convictions and sentencing, which is great to see that happen. It happens not enough, but it's happening regularly. Okay, and then Miss C, I wanted to highlight, just to highlight the age range of the women that we encounter. Miss C is a woman aged 65 and she was actually in her 70s. And we operate a very intense online outreach to women across Sussex and across the whole of the southeast actually. And this lady is an example of the success of that. She had been involved in prostitution for over 20 years, and it was the first time she'd been contacted by a support service. I'm going to go over to another document now, which will highlight this a little bit more, which is our annual report. And you can find this annual report on the Possibility site, and you can also find it on our website. Can you see that report? Has that come up correctly for you? So this is our annual report of 2021, and it highlights the last 12 months. So it's a snapshot back, particularly during COVID as well. And let me just see if I can move that across. So some of the prostitution facts, they include the facts about modern slavery within that. And then you can see here, we've put this image here to show the percentage of women as opposed to men, and also the trans community. It's worth mentioning those who are a particularly at risk minority group within this, who are impacted by this issue. And then looking across at Sussex, some of the figures here, I'll just try and make that a bit larger for you so that you can see that. Some of the figures in Sussex. This is just a snapshot here of some of the sites that were advertising. This was taken in February this year. We're doing this every month to show you the numbers of women that are advertising. And we often come across traffic victims within that group, particularly some of them are more easily identifiable online. So that's where we work with police to do live operations across Sussex, checking out those addresses and really, talking with the individuals, offering them the support that they need. Okay, and we also operate across Surrey and London. So I'm just bringing that up just to show you a few more statistics to do with that, and just wanted to highlight what Rich was saying as well about partnership. So we work with all different organisations, the police, local authorities. We're primarily funded by the police and local authorities as well as grant foundations. But Katie Bourne, the Police and Crime Commissioner for Sussex, is a particular advocate for this issue of modern slavery. So I would like to just highlight that, because she has been a fantastic advocate for this issue, and not just in Sussex, but nationally as well. And our partnerships are broad. They have to be, because of the impact and the trauma that the women themselves face. We operate in a trauma-informed way and in a women-centred way. So we put the woman front and centre. We've done a lot of work with the police and other agencies in training them to take that approach rather than an enforcement approach. And I would like to pick up as well on some of the comments that Anna's made about the joined up process of the NRM. We see some gaps in that where we can improve, which is right at the moment of the women actually being referred. So a typical police operation for us will enter a address, we find a woman or several women there that want to be referred, they want to access that support. The gap between that moment and actually the first responders, which are sometimes the Salvation Army, sometimes another organisation, coming and meeting them at the police station, it can be up to 8 hours. I think the longest has been 13 hours we've had to wait for a woman, at which point we've seen several women then get very afraid and pull back and decide that they're not going to go through with that process. And in our minds, they're clearly modern day slavery victims. But the actual process itself is quite slow and clunky in that initial, those initial moments. So we're working hard with our partners to try and see that change. We do work as well with the universities quite a lot. We've got a strong internship program, as you can see here, and we have interns from the University of Sussex as well as part of their placement year, because we feel like a big part of changing the public narrative and affecting the public knowledge is to really, bring that education to young people, to get the younger generation really signed up and aware of this issue. So that's why we were very keen to take part today, and congratulations to you on putting this event on. And yeah, I think I'm actually going to leave it there. I could say an awful lot more. I would like to just fly our own flag in that today Streetlight's been named in the Queen's Birthday Honours. We're getting the Queen's Award for Voluntary Service. So I want to do a massive shout out to all our volunteers and to all the volunteers of all the organisations across Sussex that do an amazing job in this issue. Thank you.
Helena, thank you so much. And I'll pick up on Nora's point about the Queen's Award, and congratulations to you and all of your volunteers. And you've shown how important it is to get people involved in this work, and great to see that recognised. So we've now come to the end of our 4 presentations, and thanks once again to all of the speakers. You're now going to have to bear with me tracking back up the comments just to make sure we pick up your points. And to start with, I'd like to thank Lucy for, she had some comments on the statistics point from Shahrzad's presentation, and that is this issue that when there isn't a conclusive grounds decision, it makes it a lot more difficult to help people who've been affected. So I'm wondering if at this point, Shahrzad, whether you could tell us a little bit more about what conclusive grounds decisions actually are, and the importance of this issue, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. I'm trying to get the question here. The statistics was from the latest available report at the end of 2020. And I think the process of, Richard mentioned a little bit about the process as well, but so when the referral will be made, if one of the first responders and those who can make a referral, that the referral now can be made online now. So the process are two main process. The first one will be just a reasonable ground decision, and it still is not a decision for definite in terms of victims. And then the second conclusive ground decision is the important one to say that there are victims. And of course, there are some developing judgments going on. And recently, for example, a very recent case came out about a week ago from the Court of Appeal that the in terms of the admissibility of the decisions made by the single competent authorities. So, and to what extent that decision can be taken into account by the prosecution in a given case. So these are some of the ongoing developments and the fact that it can be inadmissible. So the conclusive ground decision is quite important in terms of the identification, but I guess I also call upon Rich if you wanted to add any point on that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, of course. So as Shahrzad said, there's reasonable grounds decision and conclusive grounds decision. The first one, the reasonable grounds decision, is just simply regarded as it is suspected but can't be proven. So in other words, it gives a green light for a certain amount of sort of support enablement for adults to continue with. It is expected that the information that the single competent authority in the Home Office provides is at that very early stage quite slim. There is an obligation for the investigators then to routinely and regularly communicate with the single competent authority for maybe some months following that, to a point where the single competent authority believe that there is enough to make a conclusive ground decision, which is on the balance of probabilities, it's likely they may be a victim. But what we've got to be really careful with, and Shahrzad touched on it, is where, for instance, a person who is so referred is also the suspect of a crime. And this is particularly relevant for the sort of drug distribution networks. So you get a person who is, for which there is a box of evidence to say that they are literally a criminal in the drugs industry, and that's all the motivation there is. But by the same token that they've suggested that they in fact having their strings pulled by others, upstream villains, and they've got no option but to do it. So where there is a sort of suggestion that they may well also be exploited, an NRM may well be submitted. And of course, the evidence to suggest that they are a victim may be very different from the level of evidence to say that they're a criminal. So this is one of the major issues in relation to the single competent authority, is to what weight their determination should be provided in a court setting. Just because the SCA say that on the balance of probabilities they're a victim, does that mean to say that they are not a criminal, and is it in the public interest to not prosecute? You won't be surprised to learn that this is a debate that would take an eternity to discuss fully, and as Shahrzad has mentioned, there are a whole host of recent stated cases, some of which conflict with each other about these particular determinations. So that's roughly, hopefully, to get a little insight into RG and CG, reasonable and conclusive grounds decisions for the NRM.
Rich and Shahrzad, thanks very much for that. It's really good to understand how the process works and what the importance of the two types of decision are. I'd just like to pick up on a point that we've been asked in the chat, and that is that people are commenting on the fact that we've had the statistic that after the Met, it's actually Sussex that has the highest number of referrals. So I was wondering whether the panelists would like to comment, given that this is a Sussex event and this is about what it means in our county, on what the question is, what is driving those numbers in Sussex, and if each of you want to comment, that would be really interesting to hear from your perspective. Thank you.
I'll start with that one. So the particular driver in Sussex is, and those figures that I mentioned, if you picked up on it, is in relation to referrals that originated with the Home Office, not the entire breadth of referrals. So what we're there looking at is referrals made by UK Border Force, Home Office Immigration Enforcement, and UK Visas and Immigration. So one of the key issues of that is where a lot of the people that those three organisations encounter are based. So in Sussex, for instance, we have 2 immigration removal centres based at Gatwick Airport. So they're on Sussex's geographical location. So every single person that makes an allegation that they have been exploited or trafficked in any part of the world, not just in Sussex, will make a referral. And because the location at that particular time is that they are in the removal centres at Gatwick, the demand comes to Sussex Police. Similarly, the Metropolitan Police have Colnbrook and Harmondsworth IRCs, so that's a really big factor. And Bedfordshire have Yarl's Wood Removal Centre. So each 3 of those are major factors. But additionally, you'll have people who may well be, and I say this with no particular colour either side, but you may well have a person who at some point during their asylum casework process have also brought to the attention of their caseworkers the fact that they believe that they have been trafficked or exploited either recently or historically in the UK or elsewhere. And where there is reasonable or credible reason to believe that this is a crime, then they have to refer and put that through the NRM. And of course, if it relates to a place in Sussex, then we get it. So it may well be some of those happen, they aren't thoroughly investigated in Sussex. For instance, if a person claimed that they were exploited in Libya 10 years ago, we may have to do a certain amount of the initial prime investigation and recording, but clearly a detective in Horsham is not going to be travelling to Tripoli to investigate that. So there's going to be an element, but not the full secondary investigation. So that's the key drivers for why Sussex are right up there in the sort of top 2 forces for demand from Home Office origins. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And if I may, I just would like to pick up on a point that that Anna mentioned, to do with the fact that that we are living in a geographic area which is a Home Office dispersal area for refugees. So I think, you know, with the focus that we've had from Helena and Anna on how this impacts on victims, I wonder whether Anna, whether you could say a little bit more about the people that you're working with in St Leonard's and Hastings, and how that issue of this disbursement thing impacts on their experience.
Okay, so so Hastings and St Leonard's, not East Sussex generally, but Hastings and St Leonard's is a dispersal area and has been for 20 years now. I guess the thing that we are seeing and why is that when the Home Office send people to be rehoused in Hastings and St Leonard's, a percentage of those people are trafficked people. They don't necessarily get picked up when they're being rehoused here, and I mentioned the Links project, who they'll be encouraged towards in order to find out a bit more about them, I guess, and how they can get asylum help at that point. I'm not really sure whether I've answered your question, Tony.
You have. I think it's important that we see how that actually affects people who will end up on the ground in Sussex. And so because of the fact that they might arrive with very little to support them in the area, because of this policy, that's why the intervention of organisations such as your own is so important in working with them. So it's good to get that perspective. Thank you, Anna. And we've been talking about geography, but I want to pick up on something that I found very interesting from Helena's presentation. And that's on the fact that as well as the geographic issue of Sussex, you also mentioned doing outreach work online. I think that sounds really interesting. And I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about that, because that transcends geography.
Yeah, no problem. And yeah, I think this issue it's a difficult one to put figures and numbers on. You know, all the government documents and researches that try and put a figure on this. And it's difficult because it's so fluid, and the internet has exacerbated that, and COVID has added another level to that as well. So we've seen an increase, for example, of women working on online, so minimizing the physical harm, but also exacerbating the isolation, the loneliness, all of those issues, and the mental health issues, because we have a huge number of mental health issues we're dealing with on a daily basis. In terms of how we operate online, there are thousands of websites out there. And it's one of the things that we're working with parliamentarians on, to try and get the legislation tightened up, to really monitor what's going on online, because it's not difficult to see where the issue is. I often like to say this issue it's hidden, but right under the surface. So it's there, and it's alive and kicking, and it doesn't take much if you lift the lid to just see it right there under the surface. I would also comment just, on the issue of why Sussex, that I think as well, so Sussex is proactive in this issue. And because we are proactive with the police, organisations, professionals across the board, then, we should be commended for that in Sussex. But also it does bring this issue right to the forefront. It brings it to the surface. And of course, the online, like you've said, Tony, there's no limits to that. So we increasingly have women outside of Sussex, outside of the southeast, who are reaching out to us because they can, because there is support. But we see the fluidity of the industry, if you like, across the county lines. Women that are living in Sussex but working in Surrey or London, and vice versa. This movement of women, we can often see the same women on the streets of London that we then see in Surrey or Sussex. So they're moving around, and I think, again, highlighting the partnership approach, and why we're being effective is because we have those joining up the dots, joining up the professional response to what is it's a pandemic of this issue. I would say it is a pandemic, as it's everywhere, and it's out of control.
Absolutely, and I think there's some really important points to do with how the restrictions and people staying home because of COVID actually allows this form of exploitation to thrive, because simply there is much less visibility of what's going on in communities. That sort of brings me rather neatly into a point. Thank you, Helena. That brings me rather neatly into a related point from the chat, where we've looked at, I think, both Richard and some of the other speakers mentioned case studies. So we have a question to do with if we're looking at car washes and other kinds of pop-up industries, what should we be taking a second look at? I'm really interested in the panelists, particularly those who sort of have experienced the sort of recent increases in areas. So Helena, if we could go back to you, please. Have you got your hand up?
Yeah, I can give a direct example of this.
Super.
In lovely, leafy Horsham in North Sussex, where we were alerted to a situation by a member of the public in what was a lovely cul-de-sac, 4-bedroom detached houses. And what we discovered was a group of 21 individuals. I think there were 18 men and 2 women. The women were extremely vulnerable. They were all vulnerable, actually. They were living in dire conditions, mattresses on the floor. They were all looked pretty malnourished. They all had signs of physical abuse. Very few of them had their passport. They had all come from an Eastern European country. They'd all responded to a job advert online that had said there was a job with accommodation provided. And none of them believed that they were trafficked. And of course, they were all trafficked. And they were all involved. What became apparent from that is that they were part of a car wash operation that was operating across the whole of the southeast, which the police obviously were then investigating and following up those leads. But they were working from 7 o'clock in the morning till 7 o'clock at night, taking home £10. a week.
Goodness.
And all of them were being coerced and controlled. All of them, we interviewed them separately, and each one of them told us, don't tell the boss. You know, it was a worst case that we've seen. And that was in a residential, beautiful cul-de-sac in leafy Horsham.
And thank you, Helena, because we ask a question, we get a direct response on that issue. So that shows the importance of having panelists with direct experience. So thank you. We've also touched on the area of how part of the reason for the number of referrals in Sussex, as you mentioned, that we're proactive in the county. So again, a question which I'd like to put to the whole panel is, we've had comments in the chat to do with what people can do to get involved on the lobbying side and sort of influencing. So I wondered if people had any particular perspective. There are some suggestions in the chat which we'll try and sort of pull out and put in the possibility club later, but I'd be interested to hear from any of the panelists on this issue of what's the most effective way for people to lobby for change in these areas. We've mentioned problems with the referral system, for example. Would anyone like to pick up on that point? Richard, did you just raise your hand?
I was just going to offer quickly, for those that aren't aware, that there is a very good organisation called the Human Trafficking Foundation, that their specialism is lobbying in relation to the subject. So if anyone wants to look at the Human Trafficking Foundation website, they'll get quite a lot of material there. But otherwise, as I mentioned in the chat, we have the Sussex Anti-Slavery Network, which brings together all the sort of key stakeholders for the whole county. If there is a matter that needs escalating, then you've got a perfect conduit for those matters to be taken on your behalf upstream to hit the relevant mark, or at least to be signposted to the right people. So I'd definitely advocate either of those.
Thank you. That's fantastic. The mentioning the Sussex Anti-Slavery Network is very important. We're going to be coming back to that. People, we're getting towards 25 minutes past 1, so we're going to look at now sort of bringing the session to a close. This is not the end of the conversation, though, because the intention all along has been to continue exploring these issues through the Possibility Club. So Annie Marie is going to put, I think, has already put the links in the chat. But I think I'm going to do a last look around to make sure that I've answered any questions that have been made. As I say, we are slightly running out of time because we've had such interesting inputs. So then I think if we move, Annie-Marie, please, to the slides for the end of the session, just so I can look at some next steps to continue this. Okay, so in terms of the upcoming events, I mentioned in the Possibility Club, which is our secure online forum where we want to continue to explore this issue with you and with panelists that we're going to invite. We have the first timed conversation coming up on the 10th of June, which is Modern Slavery in Sussex, Spotting the Signs, Addressing the Problem. So in order to be able to contribute to that session, it's basically a sort of online web chat in a secure environment. So you need to join the Possibility Club. We've put a link in. Then the next one of the webinars that we're doing is on the 23rd of June. And this webinar is to do with how we can support employers and consumers to avoid modern slavery. So this is to touch on an area which is very important in enforcement, and that is supply chain of businesses and the organisations that we work with locally. So looking at what we can do as workers and as consumers in the fight against modern slavery. The third of these 3 webinars is on the 14th of July, and that webinar will be orientated towards victim support. So how we support victims of modern slavery and what are the implications if we don't. So we've been very privileged today to actually have already some direct insights into people who are working with victims. And I think there are so many issues that would be useful to develop in that area. So I'd be really delighted to see as many of you as possible at that event to look specifically at victim support. So there we go in terms of the events coming up. And as I say, the all-important link to this online forum is the www.thepossibilityclub.org. So please join up, and I'll be there sort of hosting. And now, as we start to sort of get to the end of the session, what I would like to say is we've probably got a few minutes for some final remarks. Before I ask the speakers to do that, I just would like to thank you for such a fantastic session, and we've had excellent feedback from all of the audience on your material. So thank you so much for giving your time today. And I would like just to give to the panelists the opportunity to make some closing remarks, please. Thank you.
I guess I would like to thank you and your colleagues, and also I'd like to thank the our audience here. I think it's so important to have that dialogue and to have this kind of conversation because this is kind of from community, and it's so important for us to hear your needs. I'm talking, for example, from my capacity as an academic at the University of Sussex. And some of my colleagues also here, like Nora Davis and others that are helping with this project. So it's so important to have that dialogue and conversation to be able to understand the needs. And so then therefore we can work with each other. And especially from Sussex, so we have Rich Lancashire, for example, from his office, and people like Helena, Anna, and so many others who are working really hard on this subject matter, so we can perhaps carry on this sort of gathering in a quite effective way.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shahrzad, and I completely emphasize that we want to carry this on. So next, if we could go to Helena, please, for some closing remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Tony. Well, I'm going to keep it short and sweet just to say thank you. I think it's been an excellent event. If there are any of our participants who want to get in contact with us, particularly police and local authority contacts, please do get in touch via our website. Our team would love to hear from you and how we can develop a stronger partnership across Sussex, particularly East Sussex as well, because we're developing our work around Eastbourne, Wealden and Lewes, that area. So yeah, it's just been an excellent event. It's been delighted to take part, and well done to the organisers.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thanks, Helena. And then if we go over to Anna, please.
Yeah, just to say thank you, really, for I need some food, facilitating this, just because it's just so good to be able to support and strengthen each other in this work and be aware of what each other are doing, so we don't have to reinvent wheels and duplicate things unnecessarily or inappropriately, and so that we can draw on each other's experience and expertise and just work together. It's just been a delight to just have a little taster of that this morning. Thank you, Tony and company.
Thank you very much.
Anne-Marie as well, wherever you are.
Thank you. And finally to Richard, please.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tony. Really kind of you, and thanks for the invite. I would say this is the sort of the steps, or these are the first steps toward this sort of modern slavery community cohesion. I don't think we've had anything like this before, where we've had that open opportunity to be able to talk about this subject right across the board. So it's very overdue and extremely welcome, and I look forward to contributing more and to any individuals that need support or assistance.
Excellent, and we've got things going on in the chat to sort of help with that. So once again, thanks to all the speakers. We've got the link to the Possibility Club. You know about the upcoming events. I'd like to thank the audience for contributing so positively and for really making it a really interesting discussion today.